prices, so that we should not subsidize energy. If you want to subsidize energy accessed by the poor, then we should give them other ways of supporting their income. Direct cash transfer would be a better way of doing it than providing subsidized energy, which will distort the market. We can also do one thing, is to diversify our sources of supply. That is, instead of importing all oil from one country, we may import from maybe 15, 20, 30 countries from around the world, so that it becomes possible that if one party is not able to supply, we should be able to get from another supplier. Third thing we can do is we can really develop alternative supply sources, alternative forms of energy which substitute this imported energy that we have. And here renewables, as was mentioned, play a lot of role, and R&D plays an important role. But I think there are serious limitations of renewables as of now, and one has to recognize this. There are a lot of, I think, romantic notions that we can have decentralized grids operating in every part of the country. Every village would have its own independent grid. Please recognize that to operate an energy grid requires skills, requires competence, technical as well as managerial. And to think that we would find 600,000 people who can do this is really, I think, somewhat of this. We need to think about how we can do that. There may be ways in which we can do it. We can say perhaps have independent grids with an idea that eventually they will be merged to a larger national grid. Provide someone charter to, say, supply a whole district, and he may set up 100 different grids and then running them together, so that we can minimize the need for skills and technical competence, and yet make it worthwhile for a person who has those skills to operate a system at sufficient scale. So some kind of a scale is important and inevitable. We can't really think of a totally decentralized system as such. I think we also have to recognize that solar and wind give energy only during few hours of the day, and not at the time. They are not available energy on demand. So that we need to find some kind of a balancing power source of energy to balance wind and solar. Either we store that, which is as of now very expensive, or we have hydel or gas or some other things which can then balance the load that is required. We can also increase our supply. Some people say, why don't we go out and buy equity oil or equity coal? By equity energy sources can guard you against market risk, because if the price goes up, you are earning something more and then importing somewhere else. But it may not necessarily guard you against what I call supply risk, because if there is a shortage in the world, the country in which you are operating, the country's government might say, sorry, you can't export this oil or you can't export this coal, you have to sell it within the country. So you will not necessarily reduce your supply risk, but you can reduce your market risk, in the sense because you are earning more foreign exchange and that you are spending somewhere else. So I think and for technical risk, I think we need redundancy in the system. You know, in a grid line, we usually have multiple pathways through which electricity can flow. In our transport network also, we should have some redundancy and so on. If you have redundancy, then you can often take care of much of the technical risk. So I think energy security is a multifaceted thing. We need to look at all these issues in the totality and recognize that really an efficient energy system is really the primary sine qua non for any kind of an energy security that you want to improve. May I now request Mr. Sunil Mitra to make his presentation?
Sure, I'll talk.
Okay.
Honorable Power Minister, West Bengal, Shri Manish Gupta, Mr. Dr. Parekh, dignitaries on the dais, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'll take a quick minute to compliment the Bengal Chamber for sustaining this initiative of focusing on the energy sector and what needs to be done. There have been very useful points that have been raised earlier. I would like to focus and concentrate only on one issue, which, well, certainly energy security does require enough power to be available. And as a matter of fact, we haven't done very badly in that. I mean, the generation capacity since 1991 has increased 3 times. Installed capacity is now 214 gigawatt, which makes India the 5th largest power system in the world. In 1991, when we did the reforms, the economic reforms, we then had a generation capacity of 70,000 megawatts. So power, of course, there has to be a lot available, because even with so much of generation, the per capita consumption, annual consumption, is 780 kilowatt hours, which is among the lowest in the world. So obviously, with increasing access and increasing utilization, there is going to be greater demand, so power has to be available. While that is a very important aspect of energy security, the point I want to make is, if power is available, how efficiently is it being distributed? And this is a big problem. And this is a problem which many of us don't really want to look at. Addressing this issue, we seem to be kind of looking away from the implications that it has on growth of the country's economy. We are looking more at the yo-yo that the rupee is on, or we are looking at, the deficits and the current account deficit, the fiscal deficit, and all of these undoubtedly important for the economy. But power is not something that we are really addressing, the distribution of power. When the reforms were carried out, the Electricity Act in 2003, which superseded all previous legislations and promoted, it sought to carry out structural changes in the sector by unbundling the vertically integrated state electricity boards and promoting open access, delicensing thermal generation, etc., etc., establishing independent regulators, multi-year tariff frameworks, competitive procurement, rural electrification, renewable energy. When this happened, at that point in time, it happened because we had, in the year 2000, power sector losses had grown, financial losses had grown to about 25 lakh crore, which was 1.5% of GDP. The rising debt of the state electricity boards then had reached 40 lakh crore. So all these reforms were brought in, and these reforms were implemented, and it has helped. As I said, generation capacity has grown. Renewable energy, as a matter of private installed capacity, has grown from 2.5 gigawatt in 1991-92, and a share of 3% of total capacity, to 62.5 gigawatt and 29% in 2012. Renewable energy generation capacity, both grid and off-grid, has increased significantly from 18 megawatt of grid-connected capacity in 1990 to 25,000, close to 26,000 megawatt in March 2013, 12% of total capacity. The Indian solar energy market had a 17.8 megawatt capacity in 2010, when the National Solar Mission was launched, and by March 2013, capacity had grown to 1440 megawatts. 513 megawatt of which was commissioned under the solar mission. Access to electricity has improved. The Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana, huge capital subsidy program, increased access sharply from 59% of the population in 2000 to 74% in 2010, 598 million to 881 million, with around 28 million people gaining access each year. Of the new electricity users, 70% live in rural areas and 38% belong to the poorest 40% of the population. While all that has happened and all that is good, we still continue to face an inadequate and unreliable power supply, which is a major constraint to India's aspirations for growth, inclusion, job creation, and middle-income country status. The peak deficit stands at 10.5%, and the energy deficit at 7.5%. Over 300 million people in India remain without electricity, and the per capita consumption, as I said, is among the lowest in the world. Now, what are the reasons for this? The sector finances, which are critical to realizing sector goals, they have been on a downward trajectory from 2009. The power sector is now looking for another rescue by the center, 4 times larger than before. Utilities in several large states face a liquidity crisis because banks have been instructed by the central bank not to lend to them. Inefficiencies at the distribution end are largely responsible. Distribution losses alone average 21% across all states. That is, a fifth of power purchased by utilities in India is not sold. Also, most utilities suffer very high debtor days. Both are measures of internal inefficiency and well within their control. Power sector losses stood at 62 lakh crore in 2011, excluding state government support to the sector. This is equivalent to nearly 17% of India's gross fiscal deficit and around 1% of GDP. Recurring annual losses have led to high accumulated losses that have grown at a CAGR of 9% in real terms since 2003. Sorry. More than doubling to around rupees 115 lakh crore, or nearly doubling to about 115 lakh crore in 2011. They are concentrated in 5 states: UP, Jammu Kashmir, Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Jharkhand, which together account for 75% of the sector's total accumulated losses. Only 5 states have accumulated profits in 2011: Kerala, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, Goa and West Bengal. The reason really has been a growing gap between the average cost and the average revenue. This used to be the reason. In 2003, however, the average billed tariff across all states was well above cost recovery. Losses were driven by distribution inefficiencies. In contrast, the average billed tariff across states did not cover costs in 2011. 15 states had an average billed tariff below cost recovery. While underpricing emerged as an important contributor to losses in 2011, distribution inefficiencies, though lesser than in 2003, still constitute the overwhelming component of losses. The present crisis is different to that of 2001 because players from outside the power sector and government are now involved. The indebtedness levels have adverse impacts on upstream, generation and transmission, investor sentiment, on creditworthiness, and the risk of contagion spreading to the financial sector and broader economy if distribution companies default on their debts is now a very strong possibility. This was not the case in 2001. The commercial orientation that the Electricity Act sought to bring about, the transparency that it sought to bring about in the operations of the distribution companies has perhaps not happened in real terms to the extent that was required. Sector regulators have also not always carried out their mandates responsibly. So there are several challenges going forward, but one of the issues, the main issue that I want to bring up is the internal governance aspect of the distribution companies that have 19 states have unbundled and created distribution companies. Not that unbundling was in itself a sector, a structural change. Whether that was the best solution or not is now being debated because it's 10 years since these reforms happened, and it's a good time to be looking back to see what were the real reasons and what is it. Is it the sector structure that was the key, given the heterogeneity of the power sector and its development, status of development across India? Does one size fit all? Questions that are very valid and should be raised. And is the incentive structures that are available to utilities and their employees, is that more important? So these are questions that will need to come up. It's pretty well known why these distribution inefficiencies have come. There are losses, there are accountability, it's not being enforced across the entire value chain. The role of employees is not central. To build a power system for the 21st century, we need a workforce that also has the skills of the 21st century. None of the utilities in India today have that. Most of the utilities in India, whether restructured or otherwise, are carrying on with a workforce that have been a legacy from the State Electricity Board, that have not operated in a competitive and a market environment, that have not operated in a transparent environment that is required to be brought about. They have not, the regulatory system has not brought in the public, has not empowered the consumers to the extent that their voice matters in regulations that they assign. All of these really are issues that need to be looked at and need to be addressed if we are going to have energy security. Energy security is of course key, and there is no issue about that, but energy security, to my understanding, depends very, very strongly on what is to happen with power if it's available and not distributed efficiently. Thank you.
Dr. Parekh, Mr. Mukherjee, it's a great pleasure to be with you here this morning, and I'm honoured to share a platform with you and Mr. Mitra, Mr. Roy and Mr. Mukherjee. We in the UK greatly value our relationship with West Bengal, particularly on energy and climate issues, so I'm delighted to be here to reinforce that and to participate today. And I also want to take a moment to congratulate BCCI for organising a wonderful event and clearly getting in a packed and august gathering. It's been standing room only, which is testament to the work. I want to cover three things briefly today. I thought I'd say a little bit about how the UK is addressing its energy security challenge and the challenge of sustainable energy. I want to say a little bit about the sort of issue of a myth that tackling climate change is antagonistic to growth. And I then wanted to say a little bit about the cooperation between the UK and India on these issues. So just a little bit about developments in the UK. The UK energy policy is really driven by three objectives. Firstly, the security of supply that Dr. Parekh laid out so clearly. And in the challenges between the UK and India are becoming quite common, particularly as for the UK, North Sea oil has declined in production, and therefore we're becoming more reliant on imports. So we are finding that low carbon energy, so renewables, energy efficiency, are becoming important for our energy security, not just for tackling climate change. The second objective, in addition, so the first objective, security of supply, the second is affordable energy to meet the needs of domestic consumers and business, and that's a key balancing factor. And the third objective is achieving our greenhouse gas emission reduction target. So the UK put in place the 2008 Climate Change Act, the first country to set in stone an 80% legal obligation to reduce our emissions by 80% from 1990 by 2050. So these three objectives of security of supply, affordability and reducing our emissions really drive policy. And as we look forward over the next decades, we're going to see in the UK our energy demand going down as we continue to drive energy efficiency. Interestingly, our demand for electricity will go up because we will be electrifying transport and heat, so moving supply to electricity, which is easier to provide from renewable energy. And so that's really pushing a key set of reforms in the UK, underpinned by the fact that a lot of UK electricity generation capacity is reaching the end of its life and needs renewing. So what the UK has an energy bill at the moment which is really focused on providing investor confidence. And we know from experience that setting the right market conditions is really important if we're going to get the investment that we want into the energy markets. So we're looking at reforms which include setting a carbon price floor, so to reduce some of the uncertainty that's caused by volatility in the carbon markets, putting in place long-term contracts, a combination of feed-in tariffs and what's called contracts for difference, which allows some certainty to investors about the return on investments, contracts for capacity, so handling the intermittency issues that Dr. Parrott referred to in renewable energy, emissions performance standards, and other mechanisms. We're looking at driving efficiency in the household and business building sector, so getting households to invest in energy efficiency, insulation and such like, at no cost to them, and recovering the cost from lower electricity and energy bills. Smart meters are a key part of our plans, an initiative on renewable heat, as well as initiatives on the generation side. So the UK is the largest offshore wind market in the world. Tidal power is something that we're investing in, although a smaller part of the mix. But I think the one thing I wanted to make, I guess, to underline is, for the UK, we regard low-carbon energy not just as important for achieving our climate change targets, not just as important for achieving our energy security targets, but also a key part of our competitiveness and growth in the future. And in the UK economy, over recent years, the low-carbon aspects of the economy have grown more and created jobs during a difficult period, difficult economic climate. So that brings me to my second point, which is about the question of whether low carbon is too expensive, and the kind of idea that tackling climate change is basically a cost and means slower growth. And the UK really believes the opposite to this. As I say, we do believe that investing in low carbon energy is a driver of growth. And we also believe this is true for the UK economy. We think this is true for companies, and those companies that really invest in energy efficiency, using resources more efficiently, whether that's water or other inputs, and thinking about how to deliver their business with the minimum inputs required, will become more profitable, will become more competitive, and will be more successful. There are some great examples of this. Marks and Spencer's, who have driven this throughout their business in the UK, but also some work in India on sustainable cotton. Unilever, we're in an ITC hotel today, also another great example. I think we believe this is true of the UK, but we also believe this is true of India, that India has an opportunity to leapfrog a lot of the approaches taken in the West, which we're now trying to re-engineer or undo. And there's been a lot of talk about the scope for India to leapfrog towards better infrastructure, given how much infrastructure is going to be created over coming years. And I think Dr. Parrott was absolutely right to caution that renewables are going to be a small part of the energy mix up front. So we're not waving a magic wand and pretending that solar or offshore wind are cheaper than coal at the moment, but the costs are coming down. But certainly what does exist is enormous opportunity for business to look at energy efficiency and think about their supply chains and reduce the inputs they need to deliver their business. Let me turn to my third theme, which is UK and India cooperation, and I think we have an enormous amount to gain from working together. Mr. Mitra set out the impressive action that's been taken by national and state governments here, and there is, as well as by the private sector and researchers, there's an enormous amount of fantastic work going on, and it's a pleasure for me to see a lot of that. We're working with the Indian government on these issues. We have substantive cooperation underway in areas such as the power sector reform, smart metering, looking at the financing of renewable energy, looking at energy efficiency, cities, both the energy issues that cities are going to face and the impacts of climate change. We've worked with the Bombay Stock Exchange to set up a carbon index based on experience from the UK. We're working with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy on sharing experience on offshore wind and tidal energy. So there's lots of opportunities for further collaboration. I think the UK and India, with close ties, compatible legal systems, do have a natural fit, and it's something that it's kind of my job to encourage and try and build more of these partnerships. And very briefly then, we've got a fantastic partnership here in West Bengal with the government, with business, think tanks and academics. We've done work in a range of the areas I mentioned, in the power sector, looking at fiscal instruments for low-carbon industrial development, working with legislators, and this is a further relationship that we want to build and drive forward. So, just to reiterate, I think for the UK, sustainable energy is something we see as important for our growth, important for our energy security, and of course important for delivering our climate change commitments and objectives. But we do think that there is a myth that kind of is a drag on progress, that tackling climate change is necessarily more expensive. Some technologies are more expensive and we need to work to bring those down, but many are not, particularly in the energy efficiency space. And we can do, the cooperation between the UK and India is very positive. We want to build more, so we're ready to help in any way we can to enhance this collaboration, tackle our common challenges, drive energy security, reduce climate change, and drive growth and prosperity in both countries. Thank you very much.
I think Sunil Ji has raised an issue about energy, electricity and power supply and its sustainability. And Phil has raised the question of climate change. Now, one way of recognizing that climate change would really make you go for more renewable energies, solar, wind, and so on, or at least low carbon energies. Even nuclear would have to play a role there. But have you more and more renewable energy means you need a balancing power from a hydro plant, for example. And here I think cooperating with our neighbors, having a Southeast Asian grid where we can import energy from Bhutan, from Nepal, from Bangladesh, we can export energy to them, because even though all of these other countries have shortage of energy, there are also changes in their complementarities. They have a holiday on Friday, we have a holiday on Sunday, time differences are there. So some time of the year we export energy to Bhutan or Bangladesh or Nepal, and other times they can provide energy to us. So I think this kind of an interaction, a larger energy exchange among South Asian countries can be an important source of this. At our institute, IRADE in Delhi, we are carrying out a study to promote energy exchange among South Asian countries. And in fact, we are organizing an international conference on October 4 and 5. And if anyone, well, people have from all these different countries,